Ukraine launched a massive drone attack on Russia on the night of August 20. Drones attacked the Taneco oil refinery in Tatarstan, an oil terminal in Taman, and a power substation in Crimea. But that's far from the full list of targets that night. Against this backdrop, Russia is increasing imports of petroleum products from Asian countries in August in response to the second wave of the fuel crisis, which has affected the regions and Moscow. It is reported that the Kremlin is practically begging India for additional fuel supplies, and India is ready to sell, but at inflated prices. Meanwhile, the State Duma of the Russian Federation has stated directly that the government is not obligated to compensate all Russians for losses from the war. For example, whose warehouses were destroyed by Ukrainian drone strikes. At the same time, satellite images showed that the Ukrainian strike on Novorossiysk seriously damaged the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, the frigate Admiral Makarov. A hole in the bow of the upper deck of the ship is clearly visible, which indicates that this ship will not be able to launch caliber cruise missiles at Ukraine for the next year. At the same time, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported today that supposedly last night they did not hit residential buildings, warehouses or substations, but rather the entire Firepoint plant that produces drones and FP-5 Flamingo missiles, as well as FP-7 missiles, the ballistic ones. And supposedly the Russians also attacked the Antonov plant today, where the Luty drones are produced. So, let's sort all this out. There are two components here, the attack on Russia and today's attack on Kyiv. Let's provide some clarified details. My name is Alexei Pecher. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are moving towards the mark of 300,000 subscribers, so I'd appreciate every subscription. So, Ukrainian drones launched a massive attack on the city of Nizhnekamsk in Tatarstan early in the morning on August 20. As stated by the press service of the head of the republic, quote, "There are disruptions in the operation of the industrial cluster as well as damage to residential buildings." They also added that several people were injured and hospitalized. According to Astra, the target of the drones was the industrial zone of the city where the oil refinery is located. The Taneco oil refinery, owned by Tatneft. Earlier, this same oil refinery was attacked by drones on August 10. At that time, the authorities of Tatarstan reported that 13 people were killed and 78 were injured as a result of this raid. I would like to note that the Taneco oil refinery is among the top 5 Russian refineries in terms of processing volumes and is the largest in Tatarstan. Previously, the facility had already suspended operations due to Ukrainian drones. Also, last night drones attacked the village of Volna on the Taman Peninsula in the Krasnodar region. The regional operations headquarters reported a fire at one of the facilities. Later, it became known that the Taman substation and the Taman Neftegas oil terminal, through which export shipments of oil, petroleum products and liquefied hydrocarbon gases are carried out, were hit. Export shipments of oil, petroleum products and liquefied hydrocarbon gases. Earlier, let me remind you, the terminal was attacked in July and early August. In addition, today occupied Crimea came under a massive drone attack. In particular, explosions were heard at night in Yevpatoria, Saki, Feodosia, Alushta and several areas of the peninsula. For a while, Sevastopol, Simferopol, Kerch, Yevpatoria and Feodosia were left without power. The blackout caused fires at the Taman substations in the Krasnodar region and Malorechenskoye near Alushta. Authorities in the Belgorod and Ulyanovsk regions also reported drone attacks. And so, according to the report from the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, a total of 726 Ukrainian drones were intercepted over 18 regions during the night, as well as over Crimea and the waters of the Azov and Black Seas. And against the backdrop of ongoing attacks on oil refineries, Russia is increasing its imports of petroleum products from Asian countries in August in response to the second wave of the fuel crisis. which has affected the regions and in particular Moscow. Once again, there are limits on liters per person. This month, purchases of gasoline and jet fuel abroad will increase to 270,000 tons. And now it is known that about a third of the imported volume will come to Russia from India, and the rest consists of petroleum products that were transferred from tanker to tanker off the coasts of South Korea and Malaysia. To be clear, in the second case, we are also mostly talking about petroleum products from India, but these petroleum products are transferred to tankers of the Shadow Fleet in the open sea and shipped to evade sanctions. The first tanker with Indian gasoline unloaded at the Russian Arctic port of Vitina in early August. Fuel began to enter the Russian market after a long pause, when Russian oil importers were trying to agree on a price. Here Russians thought that they somehow thought they were dealing with partners there and asked for fair prices. But no, the price turned out to be significantly higher than domestic wholesale prices in Russia. And the Indians, they're not fools. India asked for more than 100 rubles per liter. They say, "We don't care about your problems. Listen, it's just business. We're just making money." Just think about it. India, I ask you to take note of this. India buys oil from Russia at a huge discount. It's no secret, at a huge discount. Processes it, this Russian oil, into fuel and sells this same fuel at a markup to the same Russians. And when Russians say, "Listen, we gave you a discount on oil, give us a discount on gasoline," and India says, "Are you crazy, you savages? Who do you think you are? No, 100 rubles or more per liter. If you don't want it, don't buy it. That's your business. You can just sit there without any gasoline at all." Well, they're real pushovers, but the Russian authorities apparently have no choice, they have to buy. And let me remind you that in July, oil refining in Russia fell to its lowest level since 2002. Specifically, at that time, it reached 3.6 million barrels per day. Then it recovered to the level of 4 million barrels per day, which, however, is still a third below the norm for this time of year. In August, refinery throughput may drop to a new low. At the same time, there is no reason to expect fuel production to recover by the end of the year. This was stated directly in the Kremlin. And let me remind you that Russian regulators have allowed the production and sale of Euro 2, Euro 3, and Euro 4 grade fuels. Let me remind you that the entire civilized world abandoned these a long time ago, because this is very toxic gasoline, it affects human health, and it is very harmful to the engine. In general, it's nothing but problems. Everyone stopped using this gasoline a long time ago. I'm talking about Euro 4. Now they're even selling Euro 2 to Russians. They say, well, yes, it's bad gasoline, but buy it. What else can you do? But as they say, even this kind of gasoline will do for Russians. At the same time, the State Duma of the Russian Federation stated that the owners of warehouses damaged as a result of Ukrainian attacks should restore them at their own expense, not at the expense of the budget, as Vladimir Putin urged the day before. In the State Duma, they say, listen, there's a war going on. If someone doesn't like something, then restore it yourselves. Let me remind you, the day before, the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, instructed the government to prepare a program for restoring logistics hubs that came under attack by the armed forces of Ukraine. Since mid-July, let me remind you, the infrastructure of the company Wildberries has mainly been targeted by drone attacks. The armed forces of Ukraine have affected 23 warehouses of the largest Russian marketplace and deprived it of a quarter of all its logistics capacity. And taking into account the goods that were burned, it caused almost 1 trillion rubles in damage. And now Putin says, listen, let Russians pay for this damage out of their own taxes. Like, well, what did you expect? You supported Putin, you supported him. Now fork out and pay for this war out of your own pockets. And one more piece of good news. The Ukrainian strike on Novorossiysk on August 12 seriously damaged the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, the frigate Admiral Makarov. This is confirmed by recent satellite images. Even the Z-channel military informant writes that the ship clearly has a hole in the bow of the upper deck, to the left of the location of the Calibre cruise missile. According to his assessment, the Centaur satellite communication station and the positive M1-2 radar detection system located closer to the Stan are also damaged. The strikes hit the area of the vertical launch systems. As a result, there was an internal detonation after which the launch silos burned out. Admiral Makarov, let me remind you, became the flagship of the Russian Federation's Black Sea Fleet after the Ukrainian armed forces sank the cruiser Moskva with a missile strike on April 14, 2022. Let me remind you, Vladimir Putin said for a long time that no, you didn't sink anything, the cruiser Moskva is still underway. Then it turned out that after all, the Moskva sank along with the sailors, and those Russian sailors weren't needed by anyone. Well, they sank, and that's that, to hell with them. From the very beginning of the war, this frigate, Admiral Makarov, was used for attacks on Ukraine. At the same time, on August 12, the armed forces of Ukraine struck the frigate, Admiral Makarov. According to new satellite images, the most serious damage was sustained by the bow, the deck, and the launch module for caliber missiles. Well, so it's already obvious where exactly they were aiming. The Trebowanie M combat control system also went out of order, the antennas of the surveillance radar were destroyed. The antennas of the electronic warfare system, TK-25, and the Centaur satellite communication dome. And as the experts summarize, quote, the ships have completely lost their strike potential and their combat command capability. Both have been taken out of service for at least a year. And finally, about how Russia justifies its barbaric attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure and residential buildings. Let me remind you, on the night of August 20, the Russian occupiers launched a massive attack on Kyiv with everything they had. There was not a single type of Russian long-range strike munition that was not launched at Ukraine that night. Almost everything was flying: ballistic missiles, hypersonic weapons, all types of cruise missiles, regular and jet-powered Shaheds, and even banderol munitions. Well, I talked about this attack on Kyiv in the previous episode, so go to the channel and be sure to watch the previous episode to be fully up to date. And so, at first, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation issued a statement saying that they were targeting the energy infrastructure, which supposedly helps the armed forces of Ukraine. But later they came up with a better story so that the Russians, those wild and unwashed ones, would be even happier about this attack on Kyiv. In its report, the Russian Ministry of Defense stated that as a result of the attack, the Firepoint industrial facility was hit, which produced components for long and medium-range strike UAVs, as well as assembling and storing boosters used in Flamingo cruise missiles. And allegedly, the Antonov Enterprise was also attacked, which produced the Lyuty UAVs. So basically, the Kremlin presented the attack on Kyiv as a strike specifically against those enterprises that produce the weapons that have been hitting Russia over the past couple of months. The same Lyuty drones, Flamingo missiles, FP UAVs, which have been quite successful in attacking Muscovy. But I just want to remind you that actually, I think it was back at the end of 2022 or in 2023, and Putin and all his entourage were shouting that they had already demilitarized Ukraine. There was that whole story about taking Kyiv in 3 days. Now it turns out, according to their made-up reality, they have to destroy the production of advanced weapons that are attacking Russia. Let me remind you once again, Ukraine didn't have any of these weapons in 2022. And to be honest, they probably wouldn't have appeared if Pharaoh Russia hadn't attacked Ukraine with full force. Now, Russians should really think about whether it was worth starting this war at all. But unfortunately, Russians can't really think about it because they simply don't have the capacity. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like the video. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.